a little bit more to do in section 7, the quadratic formula. And before we start talking a little more about the quadratic formula, I want to talk about quadratic equations in general. And keep in mind that our solutions to a quadratic equation are really where the x-intercepts are of the quadratic function that goes along. So I want to think for a second about how many solutions could there be. And we've seen these situations along the way. If I have a quadratic function, I could have a parabola that does something like this, where I have two x-intercepts, which means I would have two solutions to my equation. I could potentially have no solutions, if that quadratic function, if my parabola is above the x-axis or below the x-axis and going down. So I'll draw that situation in another color down here. But either way, our graph doesn't hit the x-axis, which means there are no solutions. Or the one that's really easy to forget about, my vertex could be on my parabola. Or the vertex of my parabola could be on the x-axis, which means we would really only have one solution. So all of these possibilities exist for the number of solutions of our quadratic equation. All right, now let's look at our quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now let's think for a second, which part of this quadratic formula could we maybe look at to try to figure out how many solutions we're going to end up with? Now, if you're thinking that stuff that's underneath our square root, you're right. Okay, if I figure out what this stuff under the square root is, if I just look at this b squared minus 4ac, that can help me figure out how many solutions I'm going to have. Okay? So b squared minus 4ac has a special name, and it is called the discriminant. And again, it's just the b squared minus 4ac, not the square root. Okay, square root is not included in this. If our b squared minus 4ac is a positive number, if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, that means there are two solutions to our quadratic equation. And the reason for that, let's say I ended up with 4 underneath our square root here. Whatever negative b is plus the square root of 4 divided by 2a, and whatever negative b is minus the square root of 4 all over 2a, both would be solutions. So I'd have plus our square root minus our square root, and then that would give us our two solutions. If b squared minus 4ac equals 0, there would be one solution. And the reason we'd only have one solution here is the square root of 0 is 0. So it doesn't matter if I'm adding 0 or if I'm subtracting 0, I'd get negative b over 2a. Just one solution. And then our last possibility is if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, if it's negative, there would be no real solutions. Which means as far as our graph goes, that parabola would not cross the x-axis anywhere. So there would be no real solutions because if this is negative, I'd square root a negative number, which is not a real number. We'll learn about our imaginary numbers next section, but not quite yet. So we would have no real solutions. All right. Again, I can figure out how many solutions there are, how many solutions I'm looking for, just by looking at the discriminant. So that's what we're going to do here. In example 1a, using the discriminant. So in this problem, we are going to find the discriminant of the equation x squared, 3x squared minus 12x plus 8 equals 0. How many and what type of solutions are there? Now, I could potentially work through this whole equation and solve our whole quadratic equation, but I'm not asked to find the solutions. I'm just asked to figure out how many and what type of solutions are there. So let's look at that discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. Okay, our b value is negative 12 minus 4 times a times c. So negative 12 squared is 144 minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 8 is 96. 144 minus 96 is 48. So this number really doesn't matter what our number is here. All that matters is that this is a positive number. Well, I guess our discriminant does matter because that was part of our question. But other than that, like if we're just asked how many and what type of solutions are there, the only thing that matters is that this is a positive number. So there are 2 real solutions. And our discriminant was 48.